Okay, picture this. It's 2017. We're in the streets of Addis Ababa, and there are literally tens of thousands of people singing at the top of their lungs along with a young man named Hachalu Hundessa. The atmosphere, it's absolutely electric. But then, tragically, just 3 years later, Hachalu is assassinated. And his death, it immediately sets the nation ablaze, triggering riots and a massive political crisis that Ethiopia is still reeling from today. Malanjira, that translates to what existence is mine. It's this haunting lyric from Hachalu, and honestly, it's the perfect hook for our explainer today. We're diving deep into why music in Ethiopia is never, and I mean literally never, just entertainment. Over the decades, it's been a court ritual, a battle cry, a vessel for collective grief, and fundamentally, a highly potent political technology. Let's get into it. Part 1, Wax, Gold, and Empire. To really grasp how music shaped Ethiopia, we've got to rewind a bit to the imperial era of Haile Selassie. During his reign, the music, everything from sacred Orthodox chants to those big, swinging Ethio jazz bands, was actively building the mythology of a cosmopolitan, completely uncolonized empire. Now, you might be wondering, how did everyday people survive under that kind of absolute rule? Well, it comes down to this incredible concept called semnono work or wax and gold. You see, wandering Asmari minstrels couldn't exactly just walk up to the emperor and say, hey, your policies are failing, right? That would be a literal death sentence. So instead, they wrapped their dissent in these beautiful coded metaphors. The wax is the totally harmless surface lyric, maybe about love or the rain. But the gold, that's the hidden, dangerous political truth that you only catch if you know the code. What's so fascinating here is that Ethiopia developed its own native, highly sophisticated framework for political survival. French philosopher Michel Foucault famously wrote about parrhesia, basically stepping up, speaking dangerous truth openly to power, and taking whatever consequences come your way. But the Ethiopian tradition, it's a lot more cunning. It speaks that dangerous truth invisibly, entirely in code, which shifts the risk entirely onto the listener. If you recognize the gold, well, that's on you. All right, moving into part 2, the Derg's Red Terror. Fast forward with me to September 1974. That ancient empire finally collapses, and a brutal socialist military committee, known as the Derg, seizes control. Overnight, the musical landscape turns into a deadly battlefield. Why? Because of hegemony. Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci argued that you don't just hold power through violence, you hold it by manufacturing cultural consent through stories and songs. The Derg understood this perfectly. They instantly silenced that swinging Ethio jazz era and repurposed the country's brass bands to pump out revolutionary propaganda. But, hegemony is never total. The people fought back, launching this slow, underground cultural struggle using smuggled cassette tapes. And those tapes, they carried the gold of resistance safely hidden beneath the wax. Tracking our timeline here, we hit the next massive shift in 1991. The Derg falls, the EPRDF takes over, and we enter a completely different system, ethnic federalism. This shift fundamentally fractured that old imperial idea of one Ethiopia into dozens of officially recognized distinct regional identities. And, as you might guess, that deeply altered the soundscape. Which brings us to part 3. The rise of ethnic federalism, with a brand new constitution in 1995 officially recognizing over 80 ethnic groups. Languages like Afano-Oromo, Tigrinya, and Somali finally got access to national airwaves. Music suddenly became the #1 vehicle for building up these newly empowered regional identities. Philosopher Frantz Fanon once wrote this brilliant line. He said that authentic culture isn't some frozen museum piece. It's actively forged in the fight for liberation. And that hits the nail on the head when you look at artists like the legendary Ali Bira. For decades, he wasn't just preserving some ancient Oromo culture. He was actively building a modern Oromo identity right there through political struggle and song. Part 4, the soundtrack of rebellion. So all this cultural forging eventually spills right out of the recording studios and erupts into the streets during the massive protests from 2014 to 2018. Originally sparked by land disputes, music essentially became the ultimate mass mobilization tool against state overreach. There was no single leader of this movement, but they had a unified language, their songs. To really grasp the power of that rebellion, let's look at Jacques Rancière's concept of the distribution of the sensible. Rancière argues that politics at its core is about deciding whose voice counts as actual, meaningful speech and whose voice is dismissed as mere noise. When Oromo youth sang Hachalu Hundessa's songs at the top of their lungs, right in the imperial heart of Meskel Square, wow, that was a massive redistribution of the sensible. They weren't asking politely for better terms anymore, they were demanding to be heard as undeniable political subjects. Now, music can unite, but it can also reveal some incredibly deep, polarizing divides. Take the megastar Teddy Afro, for instance. His 2012 album, Ticker So, celebrated Emperor Menelik II. Now, to a lot of pan-Ethiopianists, Menelik is this heroic unifier who famously defeated European colonizers at Adwa. But to many Oromo and Southern peoples, he's seen as a violent imperial conqueror associated with historical massacres. Teddy Afro's music really brought those deep historical divisions right to the surface, and what the song meant depended entirely on who was pressing play. Akili Mbembe, a prominent philosopher, helps us make sense of this dynamic. He notes that politics in the post-colony is essentially a performance. The state stages a spectacle, and the subjects participate knowingly. So when you look at Teddy Afro's massive stadium concerts, you realize they weren't just pop entertainment. No. They were high-stakes political theater where clashing identities and historical narratives were fiercely debated by everyone in the crowd. Part 5. Algorithms and Fractured Unity. Now, this political theater turned devastatingly real in June 2020 with the tragic assassination of Hachalu Hundessa. It was a shocking event that plunged Ethiopia into immense collective grief, sparking riots, hundreds of deaths, and leading to a severe government-mandated state of emergency. In the aftermath, the country entered what philosopher Giorgio Agamben calls a state of exception. That's a period where normal law is basically suspended, reducing citizens to what he calls bare life, just mere biological existence. Amidst the internet blackouts and the horrifying realities of conflicts like the Tigray War, people were stripped of their basic political status. But their response? Underground music. Clandestine recordings and files smuggled from phone to phone became this defiant refusal of bare life. It was a way of reasserting human dignity and existence in the absolute darkest of times. And today, the battlefield has shifted entirely. The algorithm is now the curator of national feeling. We're way past the days of state-controlled TV. We're in a world where young artists on YouTube and TikTok bypass government censors with the tap of a button, reaching millions instantly from just a smartphone. But, of course, this digital freedom comes with a catch. Thinkers like Jürgen Habermas used to dream of a rational public sphere where a united citizenry could logically debate ideas. But in reality, we're seeing what critic Nancy Fraser calls effective counterpublics. Social media algorithms literally reward intense, highly emotional content. So instead of one unified digital town square, the internet has carved out these isolated emotional echo chambers where different ethnic groups are siloed off, rarely actually speaking directly to one another. So when we zoom all the way out, what are the key takeaways from our explainer today? Well, the undeniable truth is that music in Ethiopia is a relentless, multi-purpose tool. It completely bypasses logical argument and goes straight for direct emotional mobilization. Through traditional modes like Tezeta, it acts as a permanent vessel for memory and trauma. It continuously uses that ancient wax and gold tradition to evade state censorship, and it acts as the ultimate stage for post-colonial political theater. Which brings us to a massive, critical crossroads. Can music still unify Ethiopia, or is it destined to only amplify its fractures? As the digital soundscape splinters further and further into these isolated regional silos, we really have to ask ourselves, can plural identities coexist in the country without hardening into enemies? Are we looking at dangerous fragmentation, or is this finally pluralism being allowed to breathe? And so we return to Hachalu's haunting question. What existence is mine? It's a profound, heavy question that every single Ethiopian citizen is being asked by their own history right now. And whatever the future holds for the nation, you can be sure of one thing. The answer to that question will inevitably come first, as a song. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today.